Bonjour à tous. Hello everyone and welcome to the press conference for Sorry We Missed You. Bienvenue à la conférence de presse suivant la projection du film Sorry We Missed You. Et je vous présente les personnes qui sont ici à cette table avec nous and allow me to introduce the people who are sitting with us. Almost at center. He's been coming to Cannes so often that he has been granted, or should be granted, a Cannes citizenship. Director Ken Loach.
Oh, wow.
And he's also part of a very small club of people who had twice the Palme d'Or. In 2006 for The Wind That Shook the Barley, and for I, Daniel Blake, 10 years later. And I think the courtesy should be extended to the lady sitting next to me. She's been forever Mr. Ken Loach's producer.
Forever, yeah. That's true.
Rebecca O'Brien. And to the gentleman sitting at the end of the table, Mr. Paul Laverty, scriptwriter. And now, the film that you saw, of course, deals in a large part with a family, so allow me to introduce the family. As Ricky, Dad, Kris Hitchen.
Merci.
Sitting next to Mr. Loach on the other side as Abby, Mom, Debbie Honeywood. As the rebel Seb, did I say rebel? Anyway, the teenager, Rhys Stone. And as the daughter Lisa Jane, Katie Proctor. Now, if you allow me, since you guys, the family guys, are sort of unknown to us, you are so natural and so on the money, if I may say so, in the film that we have no idea where you came from. Do you have any kind of similar background to the characters you portray? And how did you land on screen with Mr. Ken Loach?
Well, I actually met Ken. It was about 18 years ago for another film that he did, The Navigator. But unfortunately, at that time, it didn't emerge to anything. So so then when this job came up and they spread the search out then to Manchester. After looking in Newcastle, I went in and met with Ken, and that was it, really.
Sorry, ma'am.
So I've worked in education for 20 years. I'd left my high school that I was in after 10 years to work supply, and I had joined this extras agency, and they had sent this advert out, and I was sat with my husband. What do you think of that? And he said, why don't you go for it? And then I had to send Ken a little video of myself and then meet him for a drink, which was enough. That was enough for me to meet him for a drink. That was wow. And then the process just went through the auditions and scenarios and met the family, and we just worked, gelled straight away. It's a big family, so... Yeah.
Mr. Stone?
They came to my school. I tried out a few things, and somehow they liked me. And then from there, I went to more auditions, I think it was. And then I feel privileged to be here, if you know what I mean. And I couldn't thank them enough for it. Oh. Like everyone on this panel, they're all such amazing people. And that's it, really.
My drama teacher came into my Spanish class and said, "Do any girls like acting?" And I didn't even put my hand up, and she went, "Come on, Katie, I know you like acting." And then 4 auditions later, I ended up being in a film, so...
That's simple. Okay. Now, had you, particularly the parents, any kind of previous experience? You said yes, you were. Not in acting, but in the kind of situation that your characters are in.
Well, I'm a mum. That's a job in itself. I work. I'm not a care worker like Abby is, but I work. Everyone works long hours. You still got to juggle your family and your relationship and everything like that in day-to-day life. I did a lot of research. I went and trained as a care worker and worked in a care home for a little bit, volunteered, and met so many women who do this job and really, keep it together. And the care workers aren't given what they should have, I can't find the word, the respect. The profession's not given the respect that it should have, I think. But yeah, and now I can't speak. Sorry.
Sir?
What's that?
Oh, no, okay. No, I thought you were going to add something.
Oh, no.
Okay. The film is taking place specifically in Newcastle. Why? And that the question, of course, is directed to Mr. Loach and to Rebecca and to Paul.
Well, Newcastle's a small city in the north, and it's got a very strong character. It's a little separate from the rest of the country. It's had a very strong tradition of struggle. The area has the old industries of coal mining and shipbuilding, which have now gone. And, of course, it's been neglected. There's very few new industries coming in, so people have really struggled. So they know the story like this one and the previous one of the most vulnerable people in a film before this, Daniel Blake. It's got a very distinctive voice, a distinctive sense of humour, born from those years of industry and struggle. It's a beautiful place to be in, to look at. It has all the social hierarchies, so there is wealth there, but there's a lot of poverty and a lot of people, I guess the majority, Debbie will know better than me, but the majority just struggling, really struggling to get on. So it's a microcosm of Britain, but in a very contained place. And the best thing is when you get off the train and you hear people speak, you start to smile. And it has a real warmth, known for its warmth and generosity of spirit. So for all those reasons, really.
It's also really easy to get around in a place like Newcastle. It's compact and it sort of replicates other cities, but on a sort of small scale. So it's a really easy place to work. And for us oldies, it's quite nice to have somewhere easy to get around in. And
that's one way of looking at it.
And it has really strong, because it's isolated city in a way, because it's in the northeast. It has a very strong culture of its own, and we fell in love with it when we did I, Daniel Blake, and it was a real pleasure to go back again.
Oh,
I think you've really said it all. It's a wonderful place to go. But I think it's just the vitality of the people, really. That's the thing that really touches you. They give us so much. I mean, we're just so lucky to have these actors with us and to have Kris from Manchester. I think these cities give you so much, and what we found that, both Daniel Blake, and this one, just, there's no small part. It's maybe short, but it's not small. And all that gives the texture to the film. Every person that's on the door, the traffic warden, the police, the people you see, and all of that builds up into just one big picture, and they just give you so much, and so it was wonderful to take advantage of that. And they were so generous with us as well.
Chaz Ebert.
Good morning, Chaz Ebert, the Chicago Sun-Times, excuse me, and RogerEbert.com. I am a professional, but I get very emotional talking about your work because my late husband, Roger Ebert, was such a champion of your work. And I think that this film, thank you, this film, you show so much in all of your films, but in this one particularly, so much detail about the real life of someone who delivers packages and who goes from being a struggling working class family man trying to take care of his family, and you show real things of family life, not just something that's chosen at random. What is the process that you went through in choosing this as a topic, first of all, and in choosing the dilemma, and this was, I guess, for you and Paul, the dilemma that the family goes through with the rebellious son, this daughter who's caught in the middle, and this wife who's trying to really hold the whole family together. It was such a beautiful film. I love it.
Thanks very much, and great respect to your husband, who was a most impressive man and a wonderful critic. So nice to meet you. I think we discussed, Paul and I and Rebecca, we talked about the whole issue of work and how work has changed from when I was young and for many years after, that you were told if you had a skill, if you had a craft, you would find a job for life and you could bring up a family on the wage. And the change, the inexorable change from that security to insecurity, where people can be hired and fired at a day's notice, where people are on contracts where the employer makes no commitment to how much work they will get or how much they will earn, working through agencies, again, no security, or being so, as Kris is in the film, being so-called self-employed, where the worker takes all the risk and the employer is in the fortunate position, he takes no risk, and the worker has to exploit himself or herself. So it's the perfect situation for the big companies. No risk, and the worker has to run himself into the ground without being told to. No strict boss to crack the whip. So, and that's the inexorable change that's happened. And it's not capitalism failing, it's capitalism working as it always will. So we talked about this, and Paul first mentioned the idea of how that would refract into family relationships, how that determines the choices families have and determines their relationships. So we talked about it a lot, and we went to meet people, and Paul did most of the research at this point, and then sketched the main characters, and then we talked again, and so it developed. But Paul should speak about it too.
Thanks very much for your question. And can I just say also, just very, very quickly, I'm very glad that our wonderful DOP, Robbie Ryan, is here with us, who did such brilliant work. So he's in the corner hiding there. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. Yeah. He forced me to say that.
Can I just say, he's the best dressed man in the unit. Always stand up, Robbie. Okay.
Thank you very much for this. I think a really, really interesting question. I mean, it's a story, so it's about a family, but power is never abstract. It actually has consequences. And I think it's very interesting, your question. And I suppose what was under the surface with us, because, you know, you're always we started talking this about 2 years ago. And I think one of the really, really big issues that's even more important now, it's almost as big as climate change and connected to climate change, is the question of inequality. I mean, just 3 days ago, Sir Angus Deaton, who teaches at Princeton, who is a Nobel laureate in economics, is just saying Britain is following the same path of the United States with extreme inequality. And he says you'll reap, you know, the consequences of that. And what he's pointed out is that over the last, for Americans without a degree, There are now, for 50 years, real wages has become stagnant and getting worse. That's absolutely significant. In the last 3 years alone, life expectancy in the United States has gone down. That's the first time that's happened in a century. And it's happening now in the UK as well. And what you see is massive concentration of wealth, and you see massive exploitation. I can tell you just one tiny little story. I'll be very, very quick. And it kind of encapsulates many of the things that we talked about. One day I went to see an Amazon driver. And I actually sat down with him, and he just told me his day. And it was just remarkable to hear it, moment by moment, how long they had to wait in the holding car park, 2 hours before they sign on, all the little tricks, the twists. And what was amazing was his eyes, his skin. He was grey. His eyes were red. He was absolutely exhausted. And by total coincidence, after spending 2 hours with him, that particular day, there had been a change in the share price of Amazon. And it was a kind of just one of these quirky little days. And by coincidence, because of the share jump in the price, Mr. Jeff Bezos became the richest man in the world and had a newspaper and had a photograph of him. And at the end of talking to him, I handed it over and he just looked at it. And it was just, his face, his jaw dropped because that moment passed and he realized that he was one of hundreds of thousands of drivers around the world. It was like a little drip, going into the river. Well, it was a really good name, Amazon, wasn't it? Because it jumped into my head that there's all these little drivers, little streams, little droplets going into the Amazon, and at the end of the estuary was Jeff Bezos' big mouth, soaking up all the profit. And that's exactly what's been happening. If we were cartoonists, we could draw it. But in many ways, that encapsulates just how technology is used for maximum wealth. And we thought, let's try and do this through the story of a driver. And the other big question, of course, is the most important things that we do, looking after our old people, our communities. Again, that's subcontracted, precarious work, 0-hour contracts. And so 2 different really important aspects of our lives, all refracted through one family. And the whole idea of work is you look after your family. And the reality is now for millions, work deprives us of spending time with our loved ones, which is absolutely bonkers, but it's the logical consequences of the market.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, hello. It's Ninos Mikelidis from Greece. Congratulations for a really very moving and powerful film, and I think both from the script side and the direction and the actors who managed to make it so authentic, really. It's really, you lived with those people. But what I'm asking is, all this, really the loss of security and the loss of jobs, the austerity and all that's happening in London, in England, and it's still worse in the countries of the south, Greece, Portugal, Spain. Do you see that, this dark image that you paint, do you think that it will continue? Do you see any change coming soon? Is there any change in England, for example, or are things getting worse? And when do you think it will go worse before we have some change for the better, to have to stop this neoliberalism and the exploitation by the banks and the big companies? And both of you.
Go ahead.
It's a big question, and the people of Greece have felt it as much as anyone, and great respect to them for the struggle they put up and the shocking way in which the European Union dealt with the problems the Greeks faced. I think it will change. It will continue until we make structural changes, because as long as the big corporations are fighting out for supremacy in the economy, how do they do it? They do it by providing the best service they can or goods for the lowest price. How do they get the lowest price? By cutting wages. That means weak trade unions, it means vulnerable workers, it means all the things we've talked about, so that the working class is weak and they can be turned on and off like a tap. And that's built into the system. And we had what we called fake left politicians like Ed Miliband, and previous the one before him, even more, well, Blair we don't even mention now. But they talked about this mythical beast, caring capitalism. And it's everyone talks about it, but no one's ever seen it. Where is it? Because it cannot. If we believe in the free market, that leads to the big corporations taking power. That leads to this competition to lower wages, and that leads to precarious work. It's an inevitable set of consequences. So it will only change when we restructure, fundamentally restructure. And the only, I'm being contentious here, but the only bright spark on the horizon in the last few years in Britain has been that we've had a left leadership in the left party, in the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. And they promised to cut back the power of capital. And their attacks on them, the smears on them, have been extraordinary. And they will get worse. They will get worse. And we saw what happened to Allende in Chile. And we've seen what happened to other left groups, to the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, which Paul knows a lot about. And if they seriously attempt to lower the power of capital, to restore security at work, to change that balance of power, to put power back to people, then they will face unprecedented attacks and all kinds of undercover smears that don't appear as political attacks, but of course are. Despite that, the Labour Party has become the biggest party in Europe, over 500,000 members from less than 200,000. So it has the potential for success. And to be a part of a European left. So that is to me, that is the possibility of hope. But my God, it's going to take some defending. And it's going to need some international solidarity too. But it's a first sign of spring. So look out for it, hang on to it, give it your support, please.
And Ninos, I think the question is, one of the scenes I love in the film was with Debbie at the very end. She just, when she's seeing her partner, bearing all the risk in hospital. I mean, met drivers like that who had been injured and hurt and they're just saying, well, how do they get away with it? Because I think they're masters at the grand narrative. Mm-hmm. I mean, you see the concentration in wealth now. Even they're frightened about it. Even Davos is frightened about it. The World Economic Forum are saying that the inequality, is actually, it's dangerous to them. But when you look at the concentration of wealth, I think it makes them very, very vulnerable. And I think that's why there's so many lies. They blame immigrants, they blame this and they blame that, but they don't look at the power of corporations. So I think that they're fragile too. And it's a question of political will. I mean, Oxfam is hardly a radical organisation, said if there's a 1% wealth tax, just 1% wealth tax, that would raise 435 billion, which would solve education for children around the entire world. Just 1% tax. But they make that look like it's an attack on business. So we have to change the grand narrative. And that's what they're absolutely fantastic at. This thing of outsourcing, onboarding, the owner, driver, franchisee, warriors, entrepreneurs, freedom, efficiency. They're masters at taking on the narrative and then blaming the worker, and they carry the weight of it. But they're fragile because the reality is so fragile. People are angry and furious. So we have to try and analyse, be creative, and actually see where power lies and challenge it. And that is the great challenge.
Mm-hmm. Question over here there.
Hello there, Sarah from Reuters. I guess this is following on, really. You were talking, Ken, about the future and how you're feeling about it. How powerful can a film be like this in getting people perhaps from the other side? You've been talking about people's polarised opinions. How do we kind of fix that situation that we have kind of an extreme right and an extreme left? And when it comes to the UK at the moment and the situation we face with Brexit, how are you feeling? Do you feel things are going to get substantially worse before they get better? And can a film like this have real impact when it comes to making change?
Well, I think we're one voice in a chorus, really. We shouldn't exaggerate the power of film. Since Daniel Blake, which was about the support the state should give to vulnerable people. And it was lucky, it went quite well, and people here were very generous to it. The government haven't given an inch. It is still as cruel. They still use hunger as a weapon. And charity food banks giving food to people who can't eat unless you put a tin in a can in a supermarket. That's increased in the last year alone by 18%. Charity food, 18% in 1 year. And we made the film 3 years ago. So they will not change. They can't change because they have to show that not being able to support yourself is a crime. They have to show that. And you speak, and I know you respect your question absolutely, and you speak of the extreme right and the extreme left. I don't see the extreme left. Where is it? Anybody here a member of an extreme left party? I don't see it. And is the extreme left in France? I see the extreme right, and I see how they thrive on anger, on a discontent, on an alienation, and they say, of course, the person to blame is the poorest person next to you. The person to blame is maybe looks different. Maybe he comes from another country. That's the person to blame. And they rise when the soil is manured by this precarious work, by people's anger. And that's where they come from. And if we don't deal with it, then the extreme right will thrive because people get angrier and more hopeless and more afraid. And the extreme right thrives on fear. The left thrives on confidence. If you're confident, you say, yes, we can change things. Yes, we can get together. It's in our power. We can do this. The right thrives on the opposite, on fear, insecurity, anxiety, reach for the easy solution. And that's our danger. So, my God, we've got to deal with it.
And don't be afraid, don't be taken in by the fact that people say there is full employment. Because the full employment is people on 0 hours contracts, like Ricky and like Abby, who add to that, but they're destroying themselves and their families in the way. So don't be fooled by the right saying, oh, things are fine because we're all employed now.
3 out of 4 children living in poverty, their parents are working. So that shows, yeah.
A quick question about the actors, and addressed to the actors. I understand. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Merci. Béatrice Malige Dufresne, c'est Radio FM Plus à Montpellier.
FM Plus from Montpellier in France.
Ma question était,
My question is as follows.
En tout cas, je suis ravie, la famille est au complet.
I'm very pleased to see that the entire family is here, so everything is going well. I'm very pleased to see you all together here. My question concerns the image, so to speak. You are Ken Loach, Mr. Ken Loach. I know one senses the fact that you really love people. You can see it in your film. The first images in the film are really terrible. They're striking. The character...
S'il faut traduire... Can you guys...
Pardon.
Oui, alors, puisque vous allez être amené à reposer votre question, pouvez-vous la poser un peu plus court?
Je vais essayer.
D'accord, attendez qu'il soit prêt.
I'll try to put my question in summarized form.
First of all,
I come from Montpellier. I was saying that... Can you hear? Can you hear the English? I was saying that I'm very pleased to see the whole family here. You're all present, and I'm very pleased indeed. I wanted to talk about the actual images in the film. I know full well that you love people. You can sense that in all your films. Right at the opening of the film, it's very disquieting because you hear the character but don't see the character. He's invisible. You can hear the character. I imagine you did that on purpose. I hope my understanding of your film is correct. And then they're both in a tiny little room. There are windows, but there are bars on the window. So the guy is off to a bad start. Clearly, he's invisible, yet at the same time, he's not free anymore. And I also want to focus on the last image in the film, which is also very interesting. The character is all alone in his van, which is like a microcosm, and he cries. It's the first time you see him cry, this man. And what is your question? So that's my question, actually. Are these tears a way of saving him? Is he saved through his tears?
Don't look at me.
Well, it's. I think the reason that Sorry, I can't answer in French. I wish I could. But the reason for the lack of picture at the beginning is to when he talks about his work, to maybe suggest that it's the kind of work that could apply to many people, not to be specific about this one person, but to say, well, many people in the audience may have worked in the building trade, many have been doing manual work. Probably half the country could write that CV. So it's to make it general until we make it specific. The room is simply a room in an industrial estate, and you see the vans outside. Actually, Ricky does cry before that when Lisa reveals that she took the keys, and he is moved by that. But I think at the end, it is imprisoned. He is imprisoned in his cab, and there is no escape. He's in debt. He will be further in debt if he doesn't go to work. There is no way out. He's trapped. The system has trapped him. And as Paul said, I mean, Paul met people, and through Paul I met them too. People who went to work with broken limbs. People who drove with a broken leg, broken arm. And there was one appalling case where a man didn't keep his hospital appointments for diabetes because he had to work. Then his diabetes got worse. He missed more appointments. He died. And it was directly traced to his inability to stop work because of the debt and because of his financial problems. Mm-hmm. This system kills, and there was no way out. So it was inevitable. It had to be that he was trapped, because that's the reality.
His name was Don Lane, and he was vomiting blood and had all sorts of problems, and they all knew about it. He'd actually had a diabetic fit previously while he was driving, but still, he still couldn't get time off work because he was scared of the £150 fines. But thanks for your question. And I would love to ask Kris this, because I never got a chance to do it. Kris, you maybe didn't hear the translation in French there, but we're talking...
I did, I was amazed.
Oh, you listened to it, aye. Oh, I couldn't get it. Aye, but it was... I mean, I think you did that scene, really, really well in that last one, so I think they'd maybe be interested in what you remember about, shooting that last scene.
Yeah, the thing is, fundamentally with Ricky, he's... through no fault of his own and sheer determination and drive to pull his family out of what's a desperate situation. And he's working hard, and so's Abby. He's just set up to fail. He's just and the realisation of that builds and builds as the film, drives forward. So realistically, that final scene was played out with all those emotions running through the back of my head as the actor. Yeah, it was more geared towards. It was a breakdown. It was a mental breakdown at the end. That's the reality of it.
Really interesting. I just say, just before we came here, one of the drivers I met way back 2 years ago, he phoned me up just 2 weeks ago out of the blue. He had my phone number, and we sometimes think it's just overwork. But what happens is, at the other extreme, and what happened to him was, they said, there's not enough work, so we want you to take 2 weeks holiday, which of course he wouldn't get paid because he was an owner, driver, franchisee, and he was up to his neck in debt. And they said, no, I can't afford to take 2 weeks holiday. He says, well, you're taking 2 weeks holiday. And he was just actually beside himself, and he says, no. So what they did was they changed his route, just to make life absolutely, totally impossible. And the guy was beside himself. He said he was suicidal. And I think what's another thing we haven't touched upon too is because it's so atomized, there's so many of these workers, they divide them up into little groups, so they can be like, one person can have 5 drivers as a franchisee, another group can be 40. So it's all interspersed all round the country. And because it's so atomised, it's so difficult to make contact with a trade union, to organise, because things change and jump so quickly. And this lad was, he said, I'm suicidal, I don't know what to do. Everyone's just, and you say, well, have you talked to someone in the trade union? And of course, it's so atomised again that they can hardly make contact. And it was much harder actually to make contact with a lot of the drivers and say, Daniel Blake, we could talk to, whistleblowers inside, the DWP, because they're all over the place, they're all by themselves, and they carry the weight of it, and they're so lonely in their work. So it was heartbreaking to listen to them. And again, it was just the power. They just changed the route, and they knew that would make life absolutely impossible for them. They're going to drive them out.
It is known, to go back to the film a tad, which we never left anyway. Ken Loach shoots in chronological order, and also give his actors only a few pages of the script. Did the actors find it liberating, difficult to deal with? Did they ever come up with some improvs among themselves that surprised Ken Loach?
Well, me personally, I found that spot on because I've never done this before. So being fed little bits, it was a lot easier for me. I did ad-lib some stuff, didn't I? The hospital scene, several times it was getting more angry, and I had to tone it down a little bit at one point. I think I was getting too angry. But yeah, I don't know what to say because I've never done this before, but this is probably the nicest way to do this.
But that's the interesting thing about the hospital scene, because in the morning when we discussed it and looked at it as it was scripted, there was a I think it was about a page and a half, wasn't it, for the hospital scene? I mean, it was a proper old rant. And obviously with the amount of people that are in because the room's a lot smaller than what it looks on the screen, you get that. So, and there's a lot of people that are packed in, so it's really on top nerve-wise to try and get all that out the way that you want to do it. But you kind of pick the key moments out, didn't you? And when you got the flurry going inside, you just blitzed it, absolutely blitzed it. And I think it is the take that's been used in the film. When we cleared shot, I actually broke down in tears because I realised how powerful what Deb had just done actually was. It was outstanding, Deb. You should be really proud.
Thank you.
Yeah, you should be, yeah.
There was, I think for Rhys and Katie, they were both lovely to work with, but Katie carried a secret for part of the film that
and I was
agreed
absolutely
she wouldn't tell anybody
for what she was going to come out with because it was surprises.
Maybe Katie could tell you on the rest. Please don't use the spoiler, but maybe Katie could tell us how that was.
It was very sad. I got a little bit of a script, but Kris and Debbie didn't. And honestly, just reading the script, I was crying already. And then when I actually done the shoot, that was real tears. I was so sad that happened. So
real tears from us too.
Yeah.
And Rhys, what about the graffiti stuff? Maybe tell me a wee bit about your prep for that. That made me laugh when you did all the prep for the graffiti stuff.
The preparation for it?
Yeah, and...
when we did the preparation, we did, what was it? Was it lessons? To learn how to do it and stuff like that. But for the bit that Harpoon, Alberto did, it was completely a surprise to me. Because obviously that's how Ken works. It's a bit of a mad one, isn't it? But when you see me laughing if you hear me laughing in that scene, it's proper laughter because I didn't know that Harpoon or Alberto was going to do that bit because I only thought it was just the duck bit. And then when we did the billboard scene?
Yeah.
I don't think I knew about what's her name, Natalia, I think it is, who did the OPK. I don't think I knew about that. I mean, my emotions weren't the best then, but it was a big shock and a big surprise for certain scenes as well. And that's all I can say, really.
We have time for one more question. Ma'am? Sorry.
Hi, Dennis Bro. I'm independent radio in the U.S., Pacifica Radio, and Culture Matters in Britain. I've loved your films for a long time, both of your films, and I have to say I was a film teacher in the U.S. with a mostly African-American student base, and I showed Bread and Roses every semester, and they loved it. They totally related to everything about it. I love this film also. I think that first scene is so incredibly brilliant. It just lays out the gig economy, and I loved also Debbie's telling off of the foreman, and I noticed that the audience clapped and cheered, which is really, really nice to hear. My question is a little bit of a downer question, though. The question is, we've been talking about organizing and what has to be done. Meanwhile, Capital is aware that drivers are the second leading occupation in the service economy, and they are working overtime to try to have the driverless car, so that even the workers are entirely eliminated. And my question is, where do you stand on this question of the guaranteed wage for people so that people really do have a wage that's just guaranteed and that's just a right to them?
Like the citizen's wage. The citizen's wage, yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a... Jen, do you want to go first?
I think it's a very interesting idea. I think it's going to be tried. Are going to be some trials in some cities. I think it's an interesting idea. It takes away the whole bureaucracy of having to decide who needs to get what benefit. So it cuts a lot of bureaucracy out. But in the end, it's a sticking plaster. I think for that to exist in a free market economy, it's a sticking plaster, because the essential contradiction remains, even with the driverless cars, because the corporations, the big companies, have to make their profits somewhere. If they remove a large part of labor, they'll make a big saving to begin with, but then the next stage, when they've all done that, how are they going to beat the competition then? Meanwhile, we're buying all our goods using fossil fuels at a time we're destroying the planet. So they're caught in endless contradictions. They solve one problem and another contradiction arrives. And in the end, we have to look at structural change, common ownership, planning, balancing our use of the world's resources, so that we can live sustainably alongside each other without ripping each other off. And until we deal with that, one contradiction will lead to another and further disasters.
I entirely agree with that, but I think your question is very interesting too, because I think if you just look 20 years hence, the whole question of artificial intelligence is multiplying so fast. It's just really incredible. And not only just drivers, but they're talking about, journalists, which raises really, really big questions, lawyers, and the more and more sophisticated algorithms all the time. And I think it's really important not to be just, because you question these big things about the digital economy, not to be thrown into the camp of being a Luddite, because I think it's really, really important that technology, technology itself can be neutral. It's how it's used. It's got great possibilities of liberation. And again, that's why it goes back to a structural question and a political question and how we want to share and have our lives. Because there is massive wealth, incredible wealth. Based on Credit Suisse information, Oxfam found out that 8 men who'd all fit in a Cannes limousine, 8 men from Zuckerberg to Jeff Gates to Slim, the 8 men own exactly the same wealth as 50% of the world's population. So it's not a problem of resources. It's how it's used. And I think artificial intelligence will raise all these questions. And unless we do have a structural change, we're left with, a more, authoritarian kind of government. And I think these are the great fears that are ahead of us.
I'm afraid our time is up. One last thing, Mr. Loach, when you showed Daniel Blake in Cannes, you said that was going to be your last movie. Obviously, it's not, and I hope you will keep on making them.
Okay, look, many thanks.
Thank you, Terry.
And to all of you, thank you very much for being here.
Okay, thank you.